One of the most infamous and notorious serial killers, whose identity still puzzles people to this day, is Jack the Ripper. In Whitechapel, a poor district of London, in autumn and winter 1888, a serial killer was on the loose and was butchering young women and leaving their remains in a horrific state. The Jack the Ripper crimes haunted Londoners, and at the time the media circus around added notoriety to the sadistic murderer. As mentioned still today, it is not completely clear who was the murderer, and there has been a theory that as the criminal removed internal organs of his victims, he may have been a doctor or someone with surgical knowledge. But there was one man who did fit this profile, and this doctor was linked to being Jack the Ripper, and it was believed whilst he was executed at Newgate Prison that he may have offered a confession. But there has been much speculation as to whether Dr. Thomas Cream, or the Lambeth Poisoner, was actually the evil Jack the Ripper. Join us today to look at the brutal execution of possibly Jack the Ripper, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Thomas Neil Cream was born in Glasgow in 1850, and he was then raised in Canada when his family moved when he was 4 years old. He attended a medical university, and then he completed postgraduate training at St Thomas's Hospital School in London, and he became a physician and a surgeon in Edinburgh. He was very well travelled, and then he briefly went back to North America and Canada, where he met a young girl named Flora Brooks. The couple fell in love, but Flora fell pregnant a few months later, after Cream promised to marry her. But shockingly he tried to perform a termination on his girlfriend, and this did not work and left her very ill. Because of this he tried to flee, and was caught by Flora's father, who forced him to marry her. But the day after the wedding he left for England, and continued to study medicine in London. But in 1878 inside of Ontario, Cream set up a medical practice, but was shockingly charged with practicing medicine without a licence, showing he was a quack, and was in a sense a fraudster and a criminal. His patients still flocked to his office, but in 1879, a young woman was found dead in a toilet behind Cream's office, and she was pregnant. She'd been killed with a handkerchief of chloroform, smothering her face, and Cream, whilst at university, specialised in this sort of medicine. Cream had refused to help her with her pregnancy. There were many rumours that he had killed her, but the case remained unsolved, and still is today. Shortly after this he set up a medical practice close to the red light district in Chicago, and he offered backstreet terminations for pregnant vice girls. He was investigated after a woman he operated on died, but managed to escape prosecution. Another girl in his care also died, followed by in April 1881 a woman named Alice Montgomery, who died of strychnine poisoning after a termination in a room close to Dr. Cream's office. Months later, another man died from the same poisoning after he was supplied with medication for epilepsy, and Dr. Cream was then sentenced to life imprisonment, but he was released after 10 years. Thomas Cream inherited a significant amount of money from his father, who died in 1887, and he then went to England on the 1st of October 1891, which was 3 years after the Ripper killings had occurred. He worked in Lambeth, which at the time was a place filled with crime and poverty. But Dr. Cream would in England kill again. On the 13th of October 1891, he met with Ellen Nellie Donworth, who was a young 19-year-old woman, and Cream offered her a drink from a bottle. That night she became very ill and died from strychnine poisoning. But the doctor would then try to get the reward money from her death by claiming he knew the killer's name. A week later he met with a 27-year-old woman named Matilda Clover, and he gave her some medication and told her to take 4 of the pills before she went to sleep. But Matilda then became very ill after she consumed these, and she had a number of violent seizures, and that night she also died. Her death was put down shockingly to have been heart failure caused by alcohol withdrawal, and it looked as if Dr. Thomas Cream had gotten away with the crime. But he then wrote to another doctor, saying he knew who killed Matilda Clover, and he said he wanted £25,000 for the information he had. He then took a brief holiday back to Canada, before he tried to kill in London again, this time meeting Louise Harvey. Thomas Cream offered her 2 pills, but then she threw these from a bridge into the River Thames. But he would kill again on the 11th of April 1892, as he met with 2 other women, Alice Marsh and Emma Shrivel, and he spent the evening with them in their flat. He gave them 2 pills and a tin of salmon, but then that evening both of the women died from strychnine poisoning. But he had sent a number of letters blackmailing officials in attempts to claim the reward money, and because of this he was drawing unwanted attention to himself. Thomas Cream was labelled the Lambeth Poisoner, and he later met a policeman, an American man, but then Cream gave this man a tour of where the victims lived around the area. But the American then spoke to a British policeman about this, and Cream's knowledge of the murders attracted suspicion, and he was placed under surveillance. Because of this, they learned about his history, and the police would then arrest Dr. Thomas Cream on the 3rd of June 1892. He was charged with the other murders and was brought to trial on the 17th of October. His trial lasted 5 days, and then the jury was sent away to deliberate, but 12 minutes later they came back and returned a guilty verdict. Following this, the judge sentenced Thomas Cream to death for his murders. He was to be hanged at Newgate Prison, a place where hundreds would be executed for very serious crimes, but his execution was one that attracted a significant amount of discussion due to what he may have said when he was on the scaffold. He was brought on the 15th of November 1892 to the gallows at Newgate Prison, and his hangman, James Billington, placed a cap and the noose around his neck. Following the final checks, the trapdoor was sprang open, and Thomas Cream plunged to his death through the scaffold and was executed. However, there were claims that on the scaffold, Cream said to the executioner, "I am Jack the," and with this the executioner told people that he had admitted that he was the notorious Jack the Ripper. Police officials and the witnesses of the execution claim that they did not hear this, as he whispered this to the executioner. But what is surprising is that Cream was allegedly in prison at the time of the Ripper murders, meaning that it would have been impossible for him to be Jack the Ripper. But a rather famous historian who studied the Jack the Ripper case has speculated that Thomas Cream may have been let out of prison early, before his official release date, as he had bribed prison officials, as he was very wealthy. But Dr. Thomas Cream was a very dark doctor and figure in medicine in the 19th century. He was a man who in a number of different countries had performed procedures and operations that had led to death and depravity. But he is most commonly known today as the Lambeth Poisoner, who was responsible for a number of women's deaths. He targeted the vulnerable women of society, and he was a depraved serial killer who had a very dark and disturbing past. However, was he really Jack the Ripper? At the time in London, there were a number of murderers who were living in the capital, and as he had anatomical and medical backgrounds as a doctor, it was possible that he could have been the notorious killer. But still today, the Jack the Ripper case captivates the world. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.